Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Toby Birch, who is a senior investment manager at Gower Financial Services. Toby is going to update us with the latest in business and finance. And remember, all opinions are personal and no investment advice is being given. As ever, good to see you.
And you, Tony. Hello.
What happened to the last 3 months? Not in terms of what's happening on the markets, but they've sped past, haven't they?
Exactly. It gets quicker all the time.
Let's start off, Toby, with a bit of a review of this continuing roller coaster, which we've seen for the last 3 months. Can we look at the UK, US, and Japan? Your comments on that, please.
Okay. It's for me, it's been relative to last year. It's more of a gentle undulation. So I'm pretty grateful for small mercies. The overall, although it doesn't feel like it, the overall stock markets have been positive. So the UK is up about 4%, and America and Japan up 7% in local currency terms. The particularly strong market was the Nasdaq Technology Index, which really burst forth. We need to remember that at the end of last year, investor sentiment was incredibly low, and you had to go back to the start of the survey to find that the sentiment index was as low as back as 1987 after the big crash. So you come from a very low base. Things overshot in January, got too carried away, and they've settled down again. So personally, I'll take that. I'm pretty happy.
Right. Okay. Well, bearing in mind our connection, I'll take on board what you've said there. But of course, one of the minor earthquakes, or perhaps it was a major one, was the Silicon Valley Bank issue, and it seems to me bankers never learn or remember from past mistakes. Is that true?
I think it does tend to be a not even a generational thing. It's every 10, 15 years you get some other problem. I mean, it is different from 2008, where effectively banks are like a sort of inverted pyramid, where you've got massive loans on top and a little bit of capital on the bottom. And I liken it to standing on a stepping stone in a river.
Yeah.
The capital the bank has is that little stepping stone. So in the past, the top bit was unstable with too much lending and too much bad lending. This time round, it was the base or support. The stepping stone is at fault. So banks had increased their margin of safety and the base support. But unfortunately, that base was invested in government bonds, which, as we discussed last time, really blew up in 2022. So what at first appeared to be a strong footing turned out to be feet of clay. Just by trusting the governments and putting your money with them.
never trust the government. But exactly. Looking at Silicon Valley Bank, it wasn't that large in terms of its assets and everything else. And who would really want to make a deposit to a small bank?
Well, it's you can remember it's in California, and it's quite a trendy bank. A lot of the directors were sort of household names. Only one of them had any experience in banking, which was quite telling. And it's kind of this blue sky thinking and this new world thing where anything's possible, but it's the old traditional problems that will always resurface. Think of old-fashioned things. I remember watching my childhood, this is Mary Poppins movie where had the child with tuppence saying, give me my money back, and it caused a run on the bank. And this is just what happens time and again. You had this particular bank lent money to venture capital firms in California, Silicon Valley, as the name suggests, which is all good stuff. But ultimately, it wasn't so much the loans; it was the fact that they lost money on their deposits. And as soon as the money starts flying out the door, then that stepping stone is just wobbling away, and it's just a matter of time. So, fortunately, it hasn't had repercussions elsewhere. What it has had is something called a moral hazard.
Yeah.
Because what the Americans done, they effectively guaranteed bank deposits. So it means this, it doesn't matter where you bank, you'll get a reward, but not the risk. So it kind of, these things always take a while to come out in the wash, and it certainly will.
Has the bank itself in the US gone bust totally? Do we know?
So the actual, well, if you look at the UK example, which was bought by HSBC, and
Yeah.
coming on to this next, that was bought for
£1.
Everyone's lost their money, but it means the shareholders take the whack. And it's different from 2008. This isn't where the governments come in and do a bailout. What was threatened was a bail-in where depositors would lose their money. And again, being in California, you've got a lot of big hitters and famous names who had deposits at this bank. So, and also, dare I say it, big donors to the Democrat Party had money there. So lo and behold, the White Knight came in and saved depositors. So it looks as though the only people who've lost are shareholders. But as I say, we'll wait and see what the repercussions are.
Going on then to the HSBC involvement in the UK, just in the UK, and the purchase for £1. No likelihood of a repeat of the Lloyd's HBOS situation that took place in 2008. HSBC are able to absorb it.
Yes, this isn't just what's called a systemically important bank. You've got a lot of, in America, a lot of smaller banks, whereas in the UK you tend to have just a big few names, and some newcomers as contenders. But it's not a repeat of sort of a government bailout, effectively.
Well, whilst not doing too badly then in the UK as far as Silicon Valley Bank is concerned, Switzerland was a totally different kettle of fish, and Credit Suisse, the second largest bank in Switzerland, effectively goes bust. What went wrong? What went wrong there?
It's really a culmination of years. I mean, everyone talks about mismanagement, but the culture that I experienced personally when I worked for a Swiss bank previously, and you had Credit Suisse employees coming in, they didn't have that view of like a custodian of client assets. They saw the client money as commission, and really it's kind of a rapacious sales approach. And that, I call it the farmer versus hunter mentality. So I've been working for a Swiss family bank, and you just wouldn't dream of trying to cross-sell products all the time, which have a hidden benefit for the person or the bank selling it. So and that culture spread across the bank over many years. So they got involved in all kinds of things like the Greensill case, lending to this hedge fund that blew up. It's just one thing after another. And they're not the cause, they're really the symptoms of a culture. And that culture blew up, and obviously they've been taken over by UBS. But it's sad to see, but unfortunately, that banking does attract some people who are just focused on, I wouldn't say, it's not just a greed thing, it's kind of this idea of being a hunter that,
the power.
Slaughtering the herd is fantastic. So hang on, what about next year? So, good old conflicts of interest.
What about the stress testing, though, that they were all supposed to have gone through? Was Switzerland unable to indulge themselves in stress testing, or does stress testing not really include the sort of things Credit Suisse were getting up to?
Yeah, I think stress testing is kind of it's like a flag waving exercise by the World Bank to say everything's financially stable, and really these things work until they don't. Just like 2008, it's always the tail end risks that come about which really flip things over. And for me, it's more of a kind of a glossy exercise to say everything's okay, because as soon as if the World Bank says we've got a problem here, get a run on the banks, becomes self-fulfilling. So it's a bit like rating agencies and credit ratings. You kind of you take it with a pinch of salt, and there's conflicts there. It's money will flow to the strongest in these cases. So it kind of I say it is self-fulfilling if you put the warning out. And regulators in financial services are about what they call financial stability, and sometimes it's like the boiling frog episode where things get worse and worse until it's too late. But I think we're all in the business of just trying to kick the can down the road.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Of course, Deutsche Bank appeared to be a bit vulnerable as well.
Yeah, I mean, just was it last month, their share price dropped by 20% at one stage. And I was looking at a longer term chart earlier. I mean, back in 2007, pre-crash, the dollar price was about $120 a share, and we're currently trading at about 10. So it's just like an evaporation of a business, steady death roll. So this one, Deutsche Bank is systemically important, to the World Bank. So it's one where I don't think it'll be allowed to go. But I mean, the share price, ultimately, the share price is just like a thermometer. It tells you, it tells you the state of things. And it's putting up a mirror up to Europe itself and what's going wrong at the moment as well.
But when you look at it from the point of view of the capitalization of the company, the bank falling, by such a vast amount, obviously, do you then have liquidity problems and things like that potentially? Or does the share price just roll along?
And the share price rolls along, but on liquidity terms, the likes of the Federal Reserve have been propping up what's called the interbank market.
Yeah.
So basically, banks don't trust each other, which is half the time. They cease lending. So the central banks are coming in to try and keep this, keep the plate spinning and keep it all rolling on. So it's like I say, it'll keep on working for the time being. But the big shot last year was the way that their reserves in terms of government bonds fell so badly. But this year, so far, the government bond markets everywhere have been improving and stable. So that takes the pressure off the banking system.
I guess the institutions have come to terms with the fact that that low interest period that existed for such a long time is over, and there's a natural adjustment. Coming back to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, we've obviously covered the stress testing, but as you probably know from, I think, about the last 24 hours, and we're recording this on Wednesday, that they've shown the UK growth rate to be the lowest of the G7. How accurate are their estimates, and how do they get the data in the first place?
I mean, it's like all these things that they are forecasts. I mean, I think the UK's forecast to grow about 1% over the next year. Which is, I think, is on a par with the likes of Italy, but still bottom of the pack. It's a bit like the way that central banks forecast inflation, have these scatter charts of growth, and it's a derivative extrapolation on the existing data. So I mean, they're only human, but you can see trends. I mean, in the case of the UK, the Prime Minister's pushed ahead with this increase in corporation tax, which is kind of it's again, talk about a death roll.
Yeah, don't get that.
It's just such a narrow-minded and short-term approach to keep loading up money on taxes on companies. And lo and behold, when the tax rate goes up, the tax take falls. Like we've discussed this Laffer curve phenomenon before.
Yeah.
So I personally, I agree with the IMF and what they forecast for the UK. And until we get to this idea of reducing the tax burden, it's going to keep on grinding down and maybe have a stagflation episode like have in the 70s, where inflation stays high and growth was flat. So it's good for no one.
He hasn't got much time to manoeuvre all this, has he?
That's right.
Corporation tax rate up this week, and income tax rate down next week, or something like that. We'll have to see. Pension funds are stable, no contagion there now.
Well, not now. Again, going back to last year, we had a situation where, again, you go back to investment banking on the topic before, but investment banks had been selling this idea that you can match your liability. So pension funds got to pay out lots of income in the future for so-called defined benefit schemes, and so it's usually used derivatives and fancy products to supposedly match these things off. And like anything we said before, again, it works until it doesn't. So when the bond markets fell, particularly towards September last year, this is when the investment banks called in their debts effectively. So pension funds were forced to sell some of their bond holdings to cover their margin requirements. So it didn't really match liabilities. It just made things worse ultimately. And storage of the Bank of England has one of the most generous pension schemes I've ever seen.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And they were caught up with this as well. So, it's all a good old king with no clothes, I'm afraid.
Oil and gas prices, OPEC still controlling the market and
Mm.
effectively making sure that prices on the oil side don't fall substantially. I mean, I
Yeah,
suppose, I suppose with the Arab countries and with any oil producer, they're selling a finite product. So I suppose they want to make whoopee for as long as they can whilst the demand's there.
that's right. And the demand's only ever increasing. I mean, as discussed before, renewables are a tiny percentage of energy supply and will be for a very long time. So while we're pushing this sort of anti-fossil fuel movement, these other countries are quite happily, supplying it at higher price and doing very well. I mean, really, this was sparked because the Americans said they wouldn't top up their emergency reserves.
Yeah.
Which again, it's kind of it's like poking a hornet's nest, and the only thing OPEC could do was then restrict supply. And really, the American approach, I mean, it's always been fairly ham-fisted, but recently, the behavior is forcing both old enemies and old allies into each other's hands. So you've got the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has got like usual suspects of Russia and Iran and China, but Saudi Arabia have just joined them literally within the last couple of weeks.
Right. Okay.
And it's just it's like a bull in a china shop politically, where the sort of Democrats just can't help themselves, can't help causing chaos domestically and internationally. And this kind of idea that China will become the world's leading superpower in 10 years is probably going to get fast forwarded, because they're, it's a cooperation agreement. They're cooperating with each other, and the people who control oil and a lot of manufacturing are being pushed together. That they're now best buddies.
Tell me, do you think interest rates have peaked, or is there another 25 basis points to go on?
They've likely peaked. I think America's the first into the rate rising cycle, and they'll be the first out. There's some are forecasting that rates will, are going to come off and be cut towards the end of the year, which I think is jumping the gun a bit. And they're likely to go back to what we call the old normal pre-2008, where you've got some inflation and you've got relatively low digits interest rate.
Yeah,
and that's kind of going to be the way things will continue, I reckon, because inflation is not going away, and you can't afford to cut rates, because if you flip back to the late 70s, rates were cut too quickly in the States, and then inflation shot up again, and then Paul Volcker had to jack up interest rates to basically crush the economy. So you don't want a repeat of that.
So hopefully at the end of the year, down to 5% or less inflation.
Hopefully. I mean, in the UK, the Office of Budget Responsibility has come at a figure of 2.9% from somewhere. So that's
because we talked about Citigroup, didn't we, last time? And
yes, that's right.
They were talking about a reduction down to about 2%. So everyone's going in the right direction.
Yeah, it's. I think that naive is too strong a phrase to use, but they're kind of on the coattails of central banks who they've got this a target of 2% inflation.
Yeah,
and they'll just kind of toe the line. But looking at the way what's happened in the States, even here you get oil and gas prices coming down. First of all, that doesn't get passed on to the consumer, as we all know, and secondly, you got also like knock-on effects of inflation in the pipeline, which just aren't going away. It's better like when a snake swallows an egg, you kind of watch it go through, through the body. It doesn't go very quick.
The thing is, though, Toby, that they're saying that grocery inflation is probably 15% plus at the moment.
I think watching the local news and Channel Islands, I believe the basket of goods in Jersey has gone up 50% over the last year, and that doesn't surprise me.
No.
Again, what you see officially is is always leaning towards the government view and of what inflation should be, and items that are in the basket can come and go. I mean, in America particularly, the way of keeping inflation low is including rental costs. In the past, and now they've shot up. It's like, oh dear, this is come back to haunt us.
I was listening to Times Radio the other night, and they did an interview with Sir James Dyson. And it was very interesting. And he was saying that part of the reason that he moved the manufacturing side into Asia was that he couldn't get any cooperation from the government, local authorities, or even the workers to make it successful in Swindon. And he came out with this comment. He said, he said, Britain invents but can't manufacture. And that's the reason it all went to the Far East. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Very much so. I mean, if you look at the engineering side in the UK, this is kind of it's seen as quite a dirty thing, and no one wants to do it. But I think, if I'm right, I believe the enrolment for mining engineering has come to a halt in the UK. It's quite unreal. It's got all these people talking about electric cars and having to find these rare earth elements. You need people with mining expertise to do it.
Of course you do, yeah.
And it's all very well, in America they're talking about sort of repatriating manufacturing, which is fair enough. I just don't think we've got the capacity of workforce. I think just it's such a bureaucratic place to get anything done, as Dyson was indicating that everyone just wants clean little desk jobs. I mean, I'm a hypocrite, obviously, but no one wants to get their hands dirty.
Well, I'm sure we can find a role for you at the Guernsey coal mine when that's open. But it was interesting to hear what he said, and essentially what he was saying is that he was forced to go elsewhere to make the stuff because he just couldn't make it over here. Let's get on to the Windsor framework, if we may. How do you see that working in terms of the fact that the EU appear to have made concessions, but the DUP in Northern Ireland don't seem to reckon the agreement at all?
Yeah, this is anything to do with Northern Ireland is incredibly complex. I think this has got a fighting chance of working, because usually the stumbling block is the EU itself. They're trying to stick a spanner in the works, really to take revenge on Britain for Brexit. And so the fact that they're kind of on side with this, I think, will overcome the sort of DUP objections. You've got to remember, Stormont's at a standstill. No one's going to Parliament anymore. So I think this will go through, and it won't be pretty in the background. Now, I always remember the German Chancellor Bismarck's quote that making laws is like making sausages. You don't want to see what goes on in the factory. Just kind of blind eye to how those laws are made.
But just hope that what comes out the other end is tasty.
Exactly, yeah. Vaguely palatable. So I do hope it works, because this is just so much effort.
I think it was interesting that the EU are prepared to consider concessions, actually, because as you said,
it's a measure of the sort of entente, I think, with Rishi Sunak. I know he's the Conservatives officially sort of pro-Brexit, but I think he and his ilk are more sort of pro-European Union in the background. And I think I think that this will help things get over the line. There's other examples as well where there's been greater cooperation.
Well, that's something to look forward to. Now, we've got some good news, haven't we, in terms of Air India deciding to sort of basically replace the fleet with a lot of Airbus planes with Rolls-Royce engines. So that's good. I didn't realise, though, until the other day that Airbus have got a manufacturing plant in China.
Okay, I know they've got some in the UK as well. So I think manufacturing airplanes is it's like a huge diaspora of factories and inputs across the world. It's really complex. But I think this is again another example of an Anglo-French element to it, which is with Airbus and Rolls-Royce. I think it is. I don't usually use the word good or bad news, but I think this is a pretty positive thing that there's this has gone ahead. I do like Rolls-Royce as well for other reasons. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it personally.
Yeah, that was good news. And of course, British Aerospace, they've got this AUKUS agreement with Australia and the US in terms of helping with the manufacturing of submarines. So, once again, that is a good news item.
It is for some people. I mean, the Chinese point of view, they don't like Australia having the first batch of nuclear subs. So this again is a bit of poking the hornet's nest potentially, because you think of the Five Eyes cooperation agreement of Australia, New Zealand, UK, America, and the like. This is kind of, from the Chinese point of view, this kind of yet more evidence of ganging up. But from a pure domestic aspect, the boys in Barron Furnace and that's some ladies as well in the factory will be pretty happy to be manufacturing.
Yeah, definitely. Bad news though for Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, the Virgin space travel is this has all gone a bit pear-shaped, because there was a spin-off some years ago of Virgin Orbit, and that they've gone bankrupt and delisted from the NASDAQ as well. So that I think they're more of a transport aspect. But I think this is a contagion for the whole space travel area for the UK. So yeah, it's sad to see that wind up, but I'm sure the Americans will pick up the slack there.
Richard Branson only had 10% in it or less, something like that. I mean, essentially, he's giving the name as much as anything.
Like,
whether or not that's counterproductive when these things go wrong.
Yeah, he's got his sort of a scattergun approach to businesses, which is fair.
No, okay, we can move on. Locally, the Green Group. Do large holding companies, such as that organisation, lose touch with their constituent members?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what went wrong within the group, but likely it's something to do with delayed property projects and the like. But it's a real pity to see some of the small subsidiaries in the like the van rental. I believe the Jersey one has gone as well. Just yesterday, the day before. So yeah, it's very sad to see, and it's not easy to just shift sort of in our environment 20-30 people into new jobs again in areas which are more sort of hands-on, not necessarily manufacturing, but practical type jobs. So yeah, it's very sad to see it. I don't personally know what's gone wrong with the group, but deal with that.
What do you think about some of the London listed companies moving to New York? What's behind all that?
It's really quite a logical thing to do. When you list a company in a particular market, the more popular that market is and the more liquid, then the greater the rating, the price earnings ratio increases and makes your company more valuable. So in the case of energy companies in America, these have got a higher premium compared to the likes of Shell and BP, who are listed in the UK. So that's one aspect, or you can get a nice bounce in the value of your company. There's also a practical angle as well, because if you have your earnings in a particular country, then it makes sense to list your shares in that country as well. So some of the moves have been quite a logical progression. When you think about it, the UK is only 4% of the world index, and it's kind of I won't call it the sick man of Europe, but it's the forgotten man of Europe when it comes to stock markets. And if you do list your firm on likes of the alternative investment market, the AIM market, I mean, for some, this is like the last chance saloon. It's where you go to put your mining companies and the like. So these don't have great liquidity, but other stock markets like the International Stock Exchange and the Channel Islands, that's doing pretty well with listings of financial instruments and the like. So yeah, it's all kind of a symptom of a degree of stagnation in the UK. And the fact the earnings aren't being generated there. But then again, you still have the head offices in London, because you
Yeah,
You
which,
like him to
which
make
means
better.
you've got the employment and the corporation tax.
Yeah, well, again, this could be an unintended consequence of,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
this is what politicians never think about. It's like GST in Guernsey. You put a
yeah,
tax up and expect to get a 1-for-1 increase in tax take, and it has hidden and unintended consequences, which are usually negative.
yeah, yeah. Must mention the late Nigel Lawson,
Oh, yeah.
who, in my view, in tandem with Mrs. Thatcher, did an awful lot of good to get the UK going again.
Yeah, he was, for me, he was a classic vintage of politicians. He also went to Oxford, studied
Yeah,
PPE, politics, philosophy, economics, which a lot of them do. I mean, he was a man after my own heart. He was critical of the European Union, sort of global warming skeptic.
yeah,
And back in the day, he helped abolish exchange controls. I mean,
yeah,
all these aspects of sort of what I call left-leaning control, which are now returning pretty rapidly,
mm,
are things that he was trying to undo.
yeah,
And it's that idea of the time of greater freedom, and it wasn't some people's cup of tea, but either him or Margaret Thatcher, coming from the same kind of pod. But for someone who lived in the 70s, it was a great
yeah,
time. I remember
yeah.
living in Pimlico in the late 80s and early 90s, when had a lot of Conservative MPs around, had lots of police protection, and as soon as the Tories got the hoof after poll tax, then the area went downhill.
So you lost your security.
Exactly. But yeah, I do admire Nigel Lawson. He was
Yeah.
a real gent, and as I say, you're missing that sort of
You don't get that
intellectual
anymore, do
youth.
you? You don't get
Everything's
that
about
with politicians.
sound
No,
bites.
no, no.
There's
And stupid tweets.
it's
Yeah,
all down to
nastiness.
minute messages, and this is what you miss, even from people like Michael Foot back in the day. He was a great thinker. He could give a speech for an hour, and it's you might get bored, but he had the intellectual capacity to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And both sides of
yeah.
Parliament had that
Sadly
depth.
lacking. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. To round off then, Donald Trump. I've got a friend who reckons that he did a lot of good whilst he was president in terms of keeping the country going and sort of saying to any antagonists, watch it, because if you go after me, I'll go after you. Do you think he'll get back?
Potentially. I mean, this is why the Democrats are setting a very dangerous precedent of throwing. Well, this obviously not coming directly, but the New York attorneys throwing all these lawsuits at him, with the idea of him not being able to stand next time. Because I don't know if he'd get re-elected, but people like DeSantis of Florida or Kennedy, for example, are very popular, and these are the people whose voices are being curtailed on social media and on search engines, and previously with Twitter as well, with these fake accounts boosting the Democrats and suppressing Republicans. So I think Democrats have to be careful about throwing stones in glass houses, because what some of them and their families are getting up to is
pretty dodgy.
It's pushing the limits. I mean, a lot of them have family members who are directors of Ukrainian energy companies for some reason, with no expertise whatsoever.
How could that have happened?
And ultimately the Americans are now fighting a proxy war, because it's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's the neoconservatives, the kind of warmongers in the American system who are in charge. I mean, they love having Joe Biden because just do what they say. And this is when President Trump or former President Trump talked about the swamp in Washington. This never went away, and if anything, it's more powerful than ever. And if they want war, and there's a lot of conflicts of interest, obviously, that like war, then that's what they're going to get. And just seeing all this money being poured into the Ukraine, and it has this kind of end of empire feel to it. When you study history and the Roman Empire, you see countries have come utterly eviscerated because of high inflation, excess spending. Even the French Revolution before when they were supporting the American War of Independence. It's just got that. I think end of days is too scary a term, but end of empire. And with this power shifting towards the Eastern Europe and Asian, Middle Eastern countries, you just feel that they've got the financial reserves and the sort of cooperation to spin off and do their own thing. So it's a sad outcome to what was a great country. I've always admired America and Americans. And they do eventually do the right thing, but just for now, it just feels like there's no coming back from this.
Well, on that slightly gloomy note, I have to thank you very much, Toby, for a very interesting chat as ever. And providing the world's still around, perhaps we can have another one in early July. Anyway, thanks, Toby. Really appreciate it. Take care. Cheers.